So let's go over the short and punchy Space Marine FAQ, what's in the document for updates for the Codex, and what hasn't materialised, at least so far. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought it was probably worth a quick video to cover the Codex FAQ for the Space Marines, which Games Workshop dropped the other day. I was holding off on this one just a little bit to see whether or not they went for a digital index update for all the Divergent chapters and things to go alongside that, but so far it seems that hasn't been the case, though if it does turn up, I'll make another video to cover that one. The update today is quite a small one, no enormous changes to the game in any way, but just kind of interesting to see how Games Workshop are progressing with the rollout of FAQs and things. This one's basically the post-Codex FAQ and Errata documents, the one that Games Workshop typically use to cover any major issues, unclear things, or typos that they might have made in the Codex, and like the Tyranids, it looks like this one's come around about 1 month after the official release of the main book. Maybe that's going to be the rough time frame going forward. Previously it used to be around about a 2-week FAQ, but it seems that they've slowed that down a bit. As ever with these ones, it's really not supposed to be a balanced update. I'm sure there might be plenty of people unhappy with the way that any one unit or any one detachment is a bit underpowered at the moment. It certainly would be nice if the first company was a little bit more scary perhaps, but they were never going to do any sort of balance updates in this. This one's purely about making the rules they've written functional and leaving behind any ambiguities. The other major takeaway is that it's really quite a small FAQ. In general, that should probably be seen as a good thing, really. As we'll get onto in a second, they really have big FAQ documents in 9th edition, so it means that if they don't have that many questions to answer, and there aren't a whole load of things that they've obviously missed, then that generally means they're doing a better job at getting the rules right as written. Otherwise, for the actual rules changes, there's one change to a stratagem, one update to a character attachment thing, and one rule for the Crusade system changed slightly because it didn't really work. There are maybe a couple of things they perhaps could have FAQ'd if they wanted to, that we'll get onto in a second, and I'd argue that none of these are the most important update that we're waiting for the Space Marines. The actual important one that I think is the one that the Divergent chapters are waiting for, things like character attachment choices for Blood Angels, Dark Angels and the rest, which have kind of been in an annoying state of limbo with quite a few of their characters right now, not able to attach to the right units out of Codex Space Marines. In terms of the actual changes they've made this time though, I'd say the single most interesting one is probably the change to the Ironstorm Walker stratagem. One of the stratagems out of the very popular and competitive Ironstorm Spearhead formation, the one that amps up your vehicles, and this one affects the Ancient Fury stratagem, basically a 1 CP option that allows you to boost basically all the characteristics of a walker for 1 command point. From one command phase to the next you get +1 to hit, along with a bunch of other things like +1 toughness, +1 movement, +1 leadership and +1 objective control. Though in general out of all that I'd certainly say that the +1 to hit is by far the most important one. The change to the stratagem is that previously it was listed that you'd also improve the saving throw of the vehicle by 1, and the weird thing was that this just didn't really work on most dreadnoughts. Most dreadnoughts already have a 2+ armor save, and given that it was worded as an improvement to the saving throw, not worsening enemy AP or anything like that, that bit didn't actually do anything for dreadnoughts and things, given that you can't improve a saving throw for more than 2+ as per the designer's commentary and the rules restrictions on that. It meant that out of normal Space Marine walkers, literally the only one that cared about that bit of the stratagem would be the Invicta Tactical Warsuit, which admittedly I think was kind of good on it, getting both a +1 to hit and also changing the saving characteristic from a 3 to a 2 for a turn. I feel like that was a fair amount of value. And although they weren't exactly common in the formation, being not quite as strong as the other dreadnoughts and vehicles right now, it maybe gave you a small incentive to run one of them if you wanted to, just as it made particularly efficient use out of this stratagem. The way they chose to fix it though was just to remove the saving throw part of the stratagem altogether, so it just does the other characteristics now. Technically a small nerf, though I think it's still pretty usable for the regular dreadnoughts. The +1 to hit's kind of fine, and the other bits might be situationally useful, even if they don't amount to all that much. Overall, it's not really enough to really affect the power of the Ironstorm Spearhead. It's still great. The stratagems are nice to have, but I wouldn't say it's the thing that's carrying the power versus the big combo with the sustained and lethal hits via the Mercy is Weakness stratagem. Otherwise, beyond that, the other changes are very light touch. Corsaro Khan has just been updated to being able to lead the company heroes unit. They've chosen to patch that as Errata and just relist all the units that he can join, including the Blade Guard veteran squad mercifully as well. I guess that Games Workshop just had missed that off as a typo. In general, it seems that anything that's marked as a captain can join those guys, whether they're firstborn or Primaris models. Not really the most relevant to most Space Marine competitive lists. Corsair Khan's okay, but it does mean that you're locked out of any other Chapters characters, and I still feel you're probably better off with Blade Guard for him, dealing some heavier melee damage compared with the company heroes. Finally, the last little change is only relevant if you're playing Crusade. This one's Ardent Protectors. Again, focusing on the company heroes, it's one of the upgrades that you can give them. For some reason, it was an upgrade that gave you -1 to wounds, despite them already basically having that built into their profile, provided there was still a captain in the unit. Makes sense that they'd changed that, as it doesn't really do anything before. Now they've changed it to +1 toughness for the unit instead, which I guess seems reasonable enough on the Crusade battlefield, given that toughness 5 models with a -1 to wound are generally going to be pretty tanky and hard to remove. In general, I think that shows that they've done kind of well. There aren't really a lot of other things that I can think of off the top of my head that really desperately needed addressing out of Codex Space Marines. There were maybe a bunch of things that don't work enormously well due to their restrictions on targeting or in-game power, making them very niche, but they aren't exactly very unclear as to their intent. One thing that I did think that they might have patched was the Eliminators plus Impulsor shenanigans that you can do. Currently, I believe that combo is still active, where you can take the Instigator Bolt Carbine on one, maybe 2 Las Fusils on the others, and then you can basically both disembark, shoot, and then use the Bolt Carbine to move again, re-embarking the Impulsor in the shooting phase, and then also get another round of shooting from within that with its firing deck rule, essentially allowing the Eliminators to fire twice, just because they happen to be jumping in and out of a tank, which seems very unintentional. I guess this might be one that they're saving for a designer's commentary sort of FAQ type thing when they next update that. Sometimes they like to fix core game things like that so they just can't be broken for any other army. And to be honest, it's not exactly the most urgent thing that they need to fix in my opinion. It's a bit weird and a bit gamey, but it doesn't actually overall add up to being problematically strong in my opinion at all. It's not a combo that I've really seen being used in tournament lists or anything. I guess maybe another thing that they could have decided to change regarding character attachment and things would be what things the Impulsor can transport. It still feels a bit weird that they can't transport Primaris squads with firstborn characters attached, whereas Games Workshop wrote an exception for Rhinos and Razorbacks the other way around, and overall it just feels like kind of weird restrictions given that they seem to have given up on transport restrictions for quite a lot of the other things in the Codex. I guess if they were really going to simplify transport rules though, they probably would have done it in the Codex. Overall, as mentioned, I do think it's kind of impressive that the core FAQ to the Codex Space Marines is quite this small. Nothing else really sticks out as utterly broken that really needs addressing, and does maybe imply that Games Workshop's getting its proofreading act together, really thinking about the rules they're publishing and all the ways that they could interact, and mercifully not being in the position where they need to publish entire pages and pages worth of FAQs to each codex that comes out. That's absolutely definitely something that's been the case in 8th and 9th edition. The Tyranids FAQ was also similarly small, only addressing one niche thing that was a bit of an edge case rule scenario for the assimilation swarm. And I guess perhaps partly it might be 10th edition's simplified rule sets that we have to thank for that, given that the army rules aren't just all overlapping and you can have all sorts of wild and wonderful combinations. You get things that are really quite limited to each detachment. There's maybe a little bit less chance for multiple weird rules to come together and do something that's either unclear or broken. Still though, I must admit it's a shame that we don't have the fixes for their Divergent chapters yet. Out of all the things that Space Marines did actually need fixing, I'd rate these as far more important than the things that they changed in this FAQ, as you basically have a whole bunch of characters across a good few armies that just aren't really working properly at the moment due to character attachment rules. I'd say it's perhaps most significant for the Blood Angels, with units like Dante and the Sanguinary Priest at the moment not being able to attach to the new Assault Intercessors with jump packs, although I think it's heavily implied that they should be able to, given that they could attach to the old Assault squads. It just feels like such a simple FAQ that they need to make for that, and in the moment Blood Angels are kind of in limbo with that, not being allowed to do so rules as written. Otherwise, the Company Heroes datasheet probably needs to be farmed out to the vast majority of Captain and Chapter Master equivalent HQs out there in the different armies. Characters like Ezekiel and Asmodai from the Dark Angels can basically only lead tactical squads at the moment, which is a bit of a sad unit roster for them. At the very least, I'd expect them to gain access to options like the Company Heroes. They could gain access to Devastators, given that a fair few characters in the core codex did, and I think if Games Workshop was going above and beyond, it'd be very nice to allow them to lead other units within the Space Marine codex. Things like Blade Guard, like Adrax Agatone, can now lead. That could make a lot of these more niche characters a lot more interesting. As well as that, they probably just need to remove a bunch of mentions to things that are in Legends now. Rules for the Assault Squad and Vanguard Veterans on foot squads are all found in Legends, and they key off the Primaris datasheets now. and there's maybe a few other things they might think about fixing as they go through the datasheets. There's still a bunch of basic rules errors in all sorts of bits of war gear on the Deathwatch index, and there's a bit of a question mark as to whether or not the Tome of Exclades is going to stay the same as it is. That's the very powerful Deathwatch relic that allows you 2 different units to get 4 wound rerolls against in a turn. If Games Workshop's feeling merciful, it might survive, though given the new Oath of Moment rules, I really wouldn't be too surprised if they nerf it. I'd consider that one a bit more of a change that I might expect, though, as opposed to one that's truly necessary. It's not like Deathwatch are running rampant over tournaments or anything. So anyway, let me know what you make of the new Small Space Marine FAQ, and if anything else wasn't changed that you were expecting to get answers to. Look forward to hearing down all your insights in the comments or anything else that I've missed. And hopefully when Games Workshop get around to updating the Divergent chapters, I'll be back to cover that. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I do try and stay on top of Games Workshop's rules updates as they come out. I also post 40k videos just about every day. And finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.